Hello and welcome. Welcome to another month of. I haven't done one of these since I first started this channel. I've wanted to do another one several times, but the problem is that it's kind of hard to find the time to fit 4 games and 4 whole reviews into a single month. But here, I've been able to do exactly that. What is this a month of then? Well, the official title is Month of PlayStation 1 Platformers that are kind of similar to other platformers from the era, but you know aren't necessarily complete copycats or anything. I'm just pointing that out so that I had an interesting thumbnail to draw, and it actually has almost nothing to do with the angle of the reviews in question. Month. Pretty catchy, yeah? I mean, I guess I could shorten it to something more boring if you have trouble saying all that. If you're that dull, we could just call it PS1 Platformer Month. So what is the first game on the chopping block? Well, it's none other than Disney's Lilo and Stitch for the Nintendo 64. Just kidding, geez, it's for the PS1. Lilo and Stitch was, according to the incredibly barren Wikia, because no wiki for it seems to exist, developed by Blitz Games, published by Sony, and released in 2002. Not sure where Disney Interactive comes in then, but whatever, let's go with it. For some reason, Lilo and Stitch was one of the games made free during the free month of PlayStation Plus in 2011, after the big outage. That was the first time I played it, and this is the second. One of the things I have to mention, because it's obviously integral to all of the best platformers, is the story for this game. Being released to coincide with the movie, I believe this game follows the same story as the film itself. It uses scenes straight from the movie as its cutscenes. However, having not seen Lilo and Stitch in 15 years, I can't totally be sure they follow the same plot. Unfortunately, I don't want to run into copyright issues by showing said scenes while I explain the plot as told by the game. Therefore, I devised an ingenious solution, which I think everyone should do when in doubt. It's not like it took me 3 hours to convincingly mimic the art style of a 4-year-old for a silly joke or anything. So the story. This game starts with Lilo and her sister Nani. They're hanging out together when suddenly a meteorite attacks nearby. Maybe it's the same meteorite that attacked Final Fantasy VII. Lilo then finds a strange blue dog named Stitch. Instead of eating Lilo, the pair decides to become partners in crime. And if you go by the Lilo and Stitch anime, they also became boyfriend and girlfriend. Next, dumb Myrtle is dumb, and she is mean to Stitch and Lilo. This makes Lilo sad. So Lilo buys her own big wheel like Myrtle's, and takes Stitch all across her entire island for sightseeing purposes. Too bad Stitch hates islands, so he's not happy. Then, Stitch bits a alien and gets in trouble. So later, one of the aliens, Jumba, tries to kill Stitch, presumably for the murder of his friend. But Stitch catches the laser bullet, Lick Goku. Stitch's power is maximum, I suppose. After that, Gantu captures Lilo and Stitch. After that, Gantu captures Lilo and Stitch, not to be confused with Stitch. Nani is scarred by the big alien, and frankly, I would be sacred too. So Stitch regurgitates Lilo by blowing up a truck? Not really sure what that means. Because of this, Stitch gets to stay with Lilo. Also, Nani is too tall to be in pictures. And that's the story of Disney's Lilo and Stitch. More or less. For fans of the movie, this is probably all they want or need, and the scenes are short enough that they don't really get in the way of people who don't care. They're horribly compressed, being fit on a regular old CD, but I don't think most kids would mind. I certainly didn't mind that sort of thing back then. Lilo and Stitch may look familiar to anyone who's played the major platformers on the PS1, because it's almost a straight copy of the Crash Bandicoot formula. Yes, like 4 years after the last Crash platformer developed by Naughty Dog was released, this came out. It was also 2 years after the PS2 was released, clearly a budgetary decision. But who cares if it's a copycat? If it's a good game, it doesn't matter, right? Well, I assumed this game would be harmless and boring. Unfortunately, it's rather broken. For the first minute or two, if you're really into Crash Bandicoot, it might seem kinda nice. After all, you're basically getting a new Crash Bandicoot experience. But it's not exactly that. To get the basics out of the way for those that don't know, Crash-style platformers consist of various levels with predetermined camera angles that follow you through the stage. You collect a certain amount of objects to gain extra lives, as well as special objects needed to continue. These games pit you against enemies that block your path, which you can attack to defeat. And there are alternative levels as well, like the ones where you're being chased by an instant kill object or an enemy, though this game is also unique in that it has whole stages that are 2D side-scrolling levels. Other than that, Lilo and Stitch follows the Crash formula fairly closely. There are two major mechanical differences, however. Firstly, the level select areas require beating bosses to progress. These are the only bosses you actually fight, with the rest being part of the aforementioned chase stages. These bosses are all the same enemy, with the same highly exploitable pattern. That means you're beating this rock monster over and over again. It never lasts more than 30 seconds, so it's not aggravating or anything, but it's not needed, nor is it fun. The other main change comes in the choices the player has. Half of the stages are ones that Lilo goes through, while the others are ones that Stitch goes through, meaning you get to play as both of them. Both have a few attack options. Lilo can pull out a voodoo doll that hurts enemies she runs into. She can bum bash enemies by jumping and then slamming down on top of them. She can also pick up the TNT-style red pots to place near enemies. And finally, she can find voodoo spoons, which allow her to summon tourists from the sky to defeat her enemies. Stitch can also use the bum bash. He can spit acid at enemies, he can spin, just like Crash Bandicoot, and when he collects enough collectibles, Stitch will roll into a ball so that he can crash straight through his enemies. One other minor difference is that Lilo and Stitch have health, instead of dying in one hit unless they find protection like Crash does. The game is aesthetically not really offensive or anything. The animations are okay, and while the environments are bland, they're not ugly. Some of the music is also pretty great. It reminds me of things like Glover, Gran Turismo 3, and Animal Crossing. Not all of it is good though. Some of the music is incredibly generic. Lilo and Stitch also has a fair amount of content, like 12 levels, time trials for every single level, and a decent amount of extras in the menu. This is where the good things on offer slow down to a crawl though. You know how creating a copy of a video that has been copied several times will eventually turn it into a mess that hardly resembles the original? That's sort of what it feels like happened here. Again, I assumed this game would be harmlessly boring and bland, like most licensed titles, but it's broken in a lot of ways. Hitboxes are wonky. Sometimes using Lilo's voodoo doll will work, and other times it won't. Not to mention, it's such a short-range attack that you have to get in the enemy's face just to use it. Sometimes you'll get hit while standing next to an enemy, and other times you won't. The control input is also too fast, but sometimes inputs don't register. If you fall into a water hazard, the game respawns you right on the edge of the water, meaning you're probably going to end up right back in it. The game's kinesthetics also feel really poor. Levels are rather uninspired in terms of design and only have a few mechanical ideas. As already established, the rock golem bosses are also uninspired and uninteresting. Meanwhile, the chase bosses are cheap because they constantly shoot projectiles at you. These projectiles are insanely accurate too, meaning the stage turns out almost into a rhythm game where you have to time your jumps to avoid projectiles, while also avoiding all of the bottomless pits and obstacles in your way. But it's not really a fun rhythm game, it's just a frustrating one. It's a needlessly huge difficulty spike. The mechanics of the game as a whole are poorly explained, and many of them have little use. TNT pots sometimes explode after a few seconds, and some of them explode instantly, yet the game doesn't have any consistent way of informing you which ones are just death traps. The game even has a problem with enemies resetting after their attacks so quickly that they become all but impossible to defeat without getting hurt yourself. I did have some very small amount of fun here, but it was more because of the formula being used. A few things I found hilarious, like the adult sunburned tourist guy enemies that try to kick Lilo as she runs by. Yay for child abuse. There was also a point where Lilo gave up. But overall, the game feels like Crash Bandicoot if it had been copied and copied and copied over and over again, until many of the vital pieces to its core were missing or corrupt. You know, I see the credits to this game, and I don't want to say it's extraordinarily awful. These are real people, and most of them are probably passionate about games and game design. I'm sure most of them wanted to make this a great game. They even have Lilo point out each section of the credits as it goes by, which is adorable.
These are the artsy people.
There is passion here, but this game really is a misguided and broken experience. I don't doubt that many of these people at Blitz Games tried to save this game, and it's possible that some of the people on the publishing team wanted a good product too, but something, probably budget and time constraints, got in the way of that. As such, Blitz Games didn't really ever seem to get the chance to make something of their own for others to copy. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in another one, here's the last one that I uploaded. You can also follow me on Twitter or subscribe by hitting the subscribe button.